With Rosemary, and we have with us the executive director of the AHMED KATHRADA Foundation, and I've been running. I'm a bit breathless. Apologies for the late commencement of the show. For those of you who've been waiting anxiously, I know, but the nature of urban living is that traffic is unpredictable. Now, if you want to talk to us, you can WhatsApp us, SMS us on 071-425-9577. And we are streaming live on Facebook, Kofifi FM 97.2, Twitter at Kofifi FM _972, Instagram at Kofifi FM, and live on YouTube, Kofifi TV Conversations with Rosemary. And Neeshan, I'm going to say your full name, I think, for the first time in my life. Neeshan Bolton, welcome.
Thank you very much.
You are the executive director of the AHMED KATHRADA Foundation.
That's correct.
Fondly referred to as Uncle Kathy. Now, before we go into everything else, we need, for those who are not familiar with Uncle Kathy, if you can explain to us, what is the AHMED KATHRADA Foundation?
The KATHRADA Foundation is a legacy foundation established in the name of AHMED KATHRADA to take forward the core values and principles of his life. Primarily two things: non-racialism and activism for social justice. Uncle Kathy's life was defined by crossing all barriers that divided people, as in the pursuit during his lifetime of the need to build a democratic, non-racial South Africa. In a post-apartheid country, we take forward those principles, particularly the one of non-racialism, because we think that that is still a kind of society that we must work towards, which would mean eradicating racism in our country, eradicating inequality, eradicating all of the ills that divide us, so that we get to a point in our future where race doesn't define who you are, where you stay, and what your life chances are. And that is the kind of non-racial future which KATHRADA and his generation started mapping out in 1955, succeeded in getting it encapsulated in our constitution. It's now up to us to begin to make that constitution, as well as the clauses of the Freedom Charter, come to life through our own actions. And the foundation does this through a number of ways, working with young people, in teaching them about history, doing leadership training with them. Secondly, it does a lot of history and promotion of history, liberation history in particular, commemorates and celebrates it. Thirdly, it hosts all kinds of dialogue, seminars, conferences on issues of race and identity. In October, we normally host a huge conference on issues of racism. This year, there's two. One will focus on the media and racism, that we do in partnership with the Institute for the Advancement of Journalism. Then, as part of the Anti-Racism Network South Africa, we also host an annual anti-racism conference where all kinds of anti-racism organizations get together to look at this issue in the country and to map out the way forward. This year in particular, we will focus on implementation of the National Action Plan to combat racism. And then fourthly, we used to do a lot of our fourth program of work was support to AHMED KATHRADA. When he was alive, that entails providing support work for about 200 to 300 public engagements a year. In the last 5 years, that is what his program was like.
That's like one almost every day.
Almost every day. That entailed visits to schools, universities, talking to young people at his flat, media interviews, taking people to Robben Island, meeting with all kinds of institutions and so forth, and roughly was 200 to 300 engagements a year. And now we're in the throes of beginning to define his legacy, and then a set of programs that will be associated with that legacy. So this particular Saturday, we launch a national tribute program to AHMED KATHRADA, focusing on his life and legacies. And we launch it in his hometown of Swaziland. And that program will be launched by Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa in Uncle Kathy's hometown. On his close to his birth date in August 21st. By the 20th, we would want to have had some work done around his gravesite.
When's his birthday?
21st of August.
Oh, my daughter's born 2 days later.
Yeah.
So, Blanca, you're in the company of great people.
So there's a lot of legacy work that we think we still need to do and we'll be doing for the next few years. There's workbooks on his life that we're finalizing now that will be able to be used in schools. And then it's a series of things that I suppose people will suggest in the years going forward. And lastly, we do archival work. There's a huge archive on Uncle Kathy and people associated with him that we have been collecting over the last 8 years. And hopefully that archive, we are now we're finalizing the digitization thereof, and we'll be able to go public soon. One of the more exciting things that might come to fruition is a permanent exhibition on AHMED KATHRADA that could possibly be hosted at Constitutional Hill, and those discussions are ongoing. So at least there'll be one permanent site where people go and engage with his life. That's what the foundation does.
Well, that's you've encapsulated it, because I've been reading about it, and I remember when AHMED KATHRADA left us that we had a commemorative show here, and I just thought this is an amazing person, because he didn't finish high school, but when he went to Robben Island managed to get 3 degrees, not just 1 but 3. And
no, he finished high school in jail.
I mean, yeah. I mean, he didn't finish it, here. He actually left it to go and do full-time political work, which was the nature of his commitment. And he also started at such an amazingly young age. And what grabbed my attention was the amazing amount of work that the foundation does with young people. And we're going to talk about this later on at the Tuesday function, where I actually saw this. It was the young people literally running the show over there, doing all the administrative work, the communications work, and you guys were able to focus more on the strategic things. But I want to go back to Uncle Kathy's commitment to non-racialism. I mean, I don't know if you're still a member of the ANC, but exactly. But in our constitution, it does say that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. And my question becomes, do you think South Africa is becoming more racially polarized? And if so, what's feeding it?
Look, all the research, particularly from the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, as well as the Gauteng barometer that they published every 2 years, supports that we are becoming a more polarized society. And what's driving it is growing inequality in our country. What's driving it is leadership that overemphasizes issues of race around any particular conflict. I think thirdly is a set of issues that relate to social cohesion, which have not been acted on and it has not been led. So there's no social cohesion program. There's no practical program that allows people to engage with their differences and to figure out how to best overcome those things. I think lastly is that we have identity politics and formation beginning to resurface in a big way on race, on tribe and so forth. And we have retreats into racial identities. Particularly if you look at what's happening amongst white Afrikaner people. There's a move towards setting up own universities, own residential areas, and fighting all kinds of ways of wanting to oppose integration, at least sections of that. But I see similar phenomena with sections of the Indian community, and I would think amongst various other communities in South Africa you find a similar way. But that's coupled with also socioeconomic status, where I think people have decided to reside amongst those who look like them and talk like them and have the same kinds of aspirations. And all of that put together divides us even more. What should be unifying us is not very clear, and who needs to promote that platform for unification. One would have expected to be the kind of national leadership of this country. And that's the biggest failure. That national leadership is involved in all kinds of other things rather than promoting unity at every given opportunity. If you look at Mandela, if you look at aspects of Thabo Mbeki's legacy, that's what they were doing. Particularly Madiba, irrespective of what the issue was, he would find ways of bringing people of all races together on platforms and in particular occasions and campaigns and so forth. That we have lost. So the foundation, and I think others, have now started to begin to look and are part of all kinds of social cohesion discussions and forums, and trying to pursue that agenda through a whole range of other formations and structures. But we saw with Uncle Kathy's funeral that it was probably one of the most diverse funerals that you've seen. He also is buried in a gravesite that is non-racial. So he's not buried in the Muslim section. He's buried in Heroes Acre there, which was important for him to continue symbolizing that kind of non-racialism. And lastly is that the advocates of non-racialism, one would have expected to come first and foremost from within the ANC, because they have been the champions of this. The ANC, however, itself, this issue is not foremost amongst many of its members at branch and regional and provincial level, and also at a national level. So the advocates for non-racialism, the advocates for unity in this country, at this point in time are distracted with other issues.
You know, it's interesting that you say that, because not long ago, when there was the land issue being expropriating land without compensation, Jacob Zuma, who was actually the president of the ANC, said something I thought was a bit bizarre in the context of our constitution, when he said, and the ANC's own constitution, when he said the black parties should have united on this. And I remember asking somebody, when he says the black parties, is he including the ANC? Because as far as I understand, the ANC's founding document says South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. But the other phenomenon, I mean, you've mentioned the fact that the different race groups are pulling apart and all wanting to live in our own little lagers. But is it not because you've already stipulated this, but maybe we need to expand it a bit further, that, for example, in the NDP, they go as far as specifying what percentage of the economy each so-called race group can actually own. And I remember asking somebody, if, for example, Indian people are only allowed to own 2% of the economy, how do you control it? If my company is now growing, am I supposed to stop its growth because I'm going to exceed the quota? Some of us, I don't know, maybe we're looking at maybe we're interpreting it incorrectly. Some of us believe that the race system in our democratic society has actually become even more specialized and defined.
No, I think we've made this extremely complicated. I think there must be aspirational goals that we should have been working towards. And the minute we started setting the targets that have been set, without being clear on how they were going to be achieved, both at a provincial, local, and national level, there were all unintended consequences from that. So when you say, well, you use the kind of national demographics and you want to apply it to people who should work in correctional services in the Western Cape, you automatically then start saying, well, there's a huge chunk of that population that won't be, that are not eligible to work there. I think the intention was rather different. The intention was to ensure that the public service and the economy is broadly representative of the country's demographics. And on the way, I think we've not gotten the formulas right. But let me also say that.
But should there be formulas?
Well,
I mean, if our aim is a non-racist society, can you impose quotas on racism then?
I think there was and there perhaps still is a necessity, because otherwise we approach this in a color-blinded way, and that can mask the kinds of inequalities and deprivations of historically disadvantaged people in this country. So there's a need to begin to track on the basis of race, to begin to see check progress on the basis of race. But when you start stipulating percentages, I think people who did that didn't really understand what the implementation thereof meant. Because let me give you an example what it results in. So you have a housing project in an RDP housing project, and there's a clerk who has to now decide who must get a house. And unless that clerk has been gone through an incredibly rich training program, for him or her, in most instances, it would mean just African people getting homes. Not whether or not other applicants are of the same socioeconomic status and need. So we've not refined just using pure race quotas with overall socioeconomic profiles of people to determine who actually needs what. So
the
that
socioeconomic conditions.
So that clerk, all that he or she does is allocates on the basis of race. And what we then found when we presented cases for colored and Indian people to be allocated RDP homes, there was huge resistance in the city of Johannesburg. They relented when it came closer to local government elections.
Oh my! But that's so opportunistic.
And then accommodated people, but half-heartedly.
No, but that was sheer opportunism then.
But that's how it plays itself out. So, and that's why I'm saying that if you use quotas and you don't, and the people who have to implement that on the ground don't have a sophisticated understanding of this, all you then get is a skewed implementation of that, which really doesn't enable us to deal with poverty as experienced by all communities in this country.
We unfortunately we always have very limited time, and because the AHMED KATHRADA Foundation is so rich in terms of the work that you do, we actually have a lot to talk about. But on the top of everybody's mind is the conference that the AHMED KATHRADA Foundation and Save South Africa convened on Nelson Mandela Day on Tuesday, the Conference for the Future of South Africa. What was this? What inspired the need for this conference, and why on that particular day?
The need from for this conference came as a result of about 4 civil society forums that the foundation convened in the last 3 months, all around the kinds of issues of corruption and maladministration. The last one essentially felt that after all these emails came out, there was a feeling that we're in a crisis moment, and in that crisis moment, we needed a crisis gathering of like-minded people to then begin to understand this moment and to talk about how best to respond to it. So that's where the conference itself came from. Why on Mandela Day? We chose Mandela Day very specifically because, one, we wanted to draw attention back to his values, back to the kinds of things that defined him as a leader. But lastly was that we also think that Mandela Day must have a character of activism. Whilst I think it is very good that people do all of the kinds of charity work, relief work, and everything, I think it's vitally important for this country. But Mandela was also first and foremost a political activist. And we thought that was an important addition to add to the overall character of Mandela Day in South Africa.
Now, one of I was actually very inspired. I mean, we did a live broadcast of Sipho Pichana, the Save South Africa Foundation's speech. And the resonating thing is, first of all, what made me happy was seeing that mix of the AHMED KATHRADA Foundation and Save South Africa having mobilized all these young people. But then I don't know whether I was sad or inspired when I saw all the old people. I mean, I saw a lady, Mashope, who was an activist in the 1950s. Which tells us how old she is. And I looked and there were all these grey-haired people. And it was freezing cold in there. And I was thinking, at that age, you've got all these problems with your joints and in this cold, but they sat there. And I was thinking, shouldn't they have been sitting somewhere in the sun, enjoying, the latter days of their lives? Instead, these are people who were activists in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and they're back here. Why were they back there?
The stalwarts and veterans continue to inspire on a daily basis. People like Mashope, Frank Chikani, Popo Molefe, and others who are part of the veterans and stalwarts, I think came to a realization about a year and a half ago that the movement that they were all part of and for which they gave the better part of their lives was beginning to lose its way. And they came there primarily to talk to the ANC, to try to persuade it that it needed to change tact, that it needed to change leadership. And that's what they've really been trying. But I think they hit what they say is a dead end when their proposals for a consultative conference didn't work out, and have now come to realize also that they have political capital way beyond the ANC. They have respect way beyond the ANC. And hence they responded to the invitation to be there so that they could get a sense of what other South Africans are saying, but also add their voice to the issues that I think brought people together at that conference. And the veterans themselves have their own program. So that group of 101, which is now I'm told about 200 odd veterans, meet almost every month. People, they take taxis and buses from all parts of the country, and they meet and they strategize. Those who are more adept are extremely busy on their own chat groups and so forth. But I think for us, what is of value is that these people deserve their own little Nkandlas in all reality. They were not afforded that opportunity. They, however, are determined that in whatever life they have left, they will make their contributions. And it was the same with AHMED KATHRADA. He was one of the first signatories to the veterans, and was inspired by what they were doing.
Now, there was, I have to say this because it really touched me before we talk about this, they kept talking about state capture, but this little incident, this thing of inspiring, I was standing outside with Popo Molefe, the former Deputy Finance Minister, Mcebisi Jonas, and some other people, and people were coming along to take selfies. And there was this young white boy of about 17 years old, really, and he comes standing there. Then when he saw a gap, he comes up to Mcebisi Jonas, who's famous for having broken the spell, so to speak, and says to me, "Excuse me, sir," in a timid voice. And Kwesi looks at him and smiles, and he says, "Can I please shake your hand and thank you for what you've done for our country?" And for me, that young boy coming to all these people, and I said to myself, this young boy, for him, heroes are people who have integrity. So there is hope. Now there's this talk of state capture, and it kept coming up. What is state capture, Shan? We're talking to Shan, Shan Bolton, I have to say that, the executive director of the AHMED KATHRADA Foundation. What is state capture? A lot of people, it's state capture. It doesn't, it's like something that's floating up there. But the more I think about it, the more I realize how it impacts me directly, because the price of electricity in 2006, South Africa had the cheapest electricity in the world. Today, many people can't afford electricity because almost every 3 months we hear Eskom is going to ask NERSA to increase our electricity bill. We've got the SASA issue of Net1 making billions in profit. And I was thinking to myself, if the post office was doing this, surely those billions could be added to the pension that pensioners are getting, rather than it going into people's pockets. So maybe when we start unpacking it that way, of how actually does it affect me, but what is state capture?
State capture, if I take your last example on the pensions issue, what you had was what you have is a tender, is pensions being paid out by a company called Cash Paymaster Services. This particular company didn't have a valid contract. Their contract was declared unconstitutional. The Constitutional Court ruled against them and instructed the department or the ministry almost 2 or 3 years ago to start making preparations for a new entity to start paying pensions. This company won the tender, or rather got the tender on the basis of corruption, and had what is called a BE partner, which were really 2 teachers living in shacks. And their names were then put together as the BE partnership.
Did they know they were BE partners?
I think they had a sense that something was happening, but they didn't have the details. And they were really expecting big returns at some point, but that didn't materialize. And later on, the company admits that it didn't have the kind of BE profile to have gotten the tender in the first place. But the minister was adamant that that company was nothing wrong with it. Delayed finding the alternative people to pay. So the Constitutional Court ruled recently. They've given 12 months to start the changes. The CEO of SASA, Magwaza, 2 days ago signs a contract with the post office precisely to do what you are saying, because that lowers the costs. It's more effective, more efficient. He gets fired the next day.
For efficiency. And for being money-wise.
Worrying about making sure that these pensions will get to people on time where they can. But because it's not in the interests of particular people who are making money out of the distribution of pensions, he now gets fired. And one can expect that even his whole handing over or the contract that he has with the post office, they will find a way of scrapping it. So state capture is really when government operations is taken over not by people in government, by people outside of government, who then influence decision making, who influence appointments of people in government, not because they want to improve the lives of people, but they want to make millions and billions of rands for themselves at the expense of the poor and the working class of our country. And they use that money to then build empires for themselves, not only here, but in Dubai and elsewhere. So that's what state capture is about. When government is not run by the people elected to do their jobs by the people of South Africa, but when major decisions and operations of government is in fact taken by, in this case, the Guptas, but also by many other who work like them. So the closest description you can have is a mafia state. when the mafia runs government
Mm-hmm.
for the interests of the mafia and not for the people of South Africa. And it's not only it covers huge amounts of areas of work of government. It's in transport, it's in energy, now it's in nuclear. You've seen it in the social services. Wherever there are big chunks of government allocations, you can be sure that there are people who have tried to figure out how to influence the decision making around those contracts and to score big time from those contracts. I mean, people are now getting paid millions and hundreds of millions of rands simply for facilitating what they call facilitation fees.
Mm-hmm.
So I introduce you to government, or I help you to get a contract. And
But
you,
how
you
do you
then-
how do you help me to get a contract? Isn't there an open tendering system?
No, that's precisely there's been a flouting of all the tendering processes. If you see the Eskom's things that came out yesterday,
Oh,
a company called Trillion gets paid 500 million rands for doing what? Nobody knows. But they don't have a contract with Eskom.
how do you pay somebody when you don't have a contract? I mean,
Because
based on what are you paying them?
because somebody within Eskom would have been primed to have, who would have been motivated sufficiently to, or pressurized to have seen this invoice from this company, and then their seniors would have said, pay this invoice. And in that context, if you are a civil servant and if you get an instruction from your seniors in that particular entity, you execute the decision. And that's what seems to be happening across the public servants. We had a very useful session with about 60 public servants last week.
Yeah, I only heard about that on Tuesday.
Yeah. And what these public servants were really telling us the same things. One, that they are made to implement illegal and unlawful instructions. When they refuse, their lives are at risk, their families' lives are at risk. And those who are brave enough to withstand the pressure eventually ways are found to get them out of those entities or government departments.
Oh yes, the most common one I believe is insubordination.
Yes.
But I'm still trying to get my head around, how do you pay 500 million rand to a company that doesn't have a contract? I mean, there's no pretense anymore. It's as brazen as that.
Well, that I think the brazenness that you describe is really what is the most remarkable thing here. What these public servants were saying is that the way in which a lot of this will start is every entity will be faced by some false report or false allegation. Then an investigation is started. On the basis of that investigation, people are suspended. Somebody acting is put into that place, and that acting person very quickly executes all of the decisions that the previous person was trying to contain and not approve. And in that's what you must see what's been happening at Eskom. Look at the people who've departed, look at who was acting, and you will then understand how an institution gets hollowed out, and people are forced out of it. Juniors are put into senior posts, and they owe their acting positions to whoever has appointed them there, and they sign whatever comes across their tables, because they're scared, or they themselves are now getting some percentage out of the net result itself.
Now, all these allegations are coming out. I mean, I've been trying to get my head around what the amount is. And because now, yesterday, as you said, we hear that contrary to what the investigation Jeff Budland had come up with of Trillion getting 226 million, we now hear that it's actually 495 million, and that McKinsey, it's 900 million. Now, in one day, basically, we hear about 1.4 billion. 2 days before that, we heard about 100 million. And 2 days prior to that, there was another 100 million. Then there was a 5-point-something billion. And you start wondering exactly how much are we talking about? Do you guys have any idea at this stage? Because I know it won't be the end amount.
No, I don't think anybody will have a kind of a clue of what the full extent is. I think some research has started coming out on different entities, and at this point in time, you're looking at hundreds of billions of rands. That seems to be the emerging figures, but the totality of that could. Remember, you're running a budget of over $1 trillion at the moment.
But if we're talking about hundreds of billions, it seems to be adding up to $1 trillion now.
Yeah.
So basically, we're saying our entire annual budget could have been looted already.
Well, the cumulative amount
Yes.
over the number of years might well be the equivalent of 1 year's total budget. And when you imagine what that kind of money could do for alleviating much of the problems in this country, it's beyond imagination. And when you realize that you don't have a single oncologist left in KZN because there's no money for their posts, then you realize how this impacts on the day-to-day life of people. And I think you will begin to see more and more of this as the exposures intensify and as the economic climate begins to kick in, and there's a realization that there's no more money. Then all that people will do is to begin to cut services.
But I think that's already happening, which is why we're seeing more protests.
They will cut it even more.
I mean, I was actually looking that amount of the PRASA one, of the locomotives kickback of 5-point-something billion.
Yeah.
That's the entire Gauteng provincial government's annual housing budget, which is actually 25% of the national housing budget. And when I put my head around that, and the other day we had the mayor here complaining that he's got 300,000 people on the waiting list in the city of Joburg, but he only has a budget of 247 million. And yet 5-point-something billion has been given to one family.
Yeah. And for what? For commissions.
But my thing now is, now all these things are coming out. What are our law enforcement agencies doing?
Well, one of the ways that state capture has worked was to make sure that precisely the law enforcement agencies themselves become incapable of doing their jobs. That if you look at the leadership of much of the law enforcement agencies, they were put there in the view of many commentators only to do one thing, is to prevent the president from going to jail, is to prevent him from being charged. Now that's the view of a number of analysts. And that's why the Hawks, if you look at how quick they acted against Pravin.
Yes.
They did that with
They
with great
hounded
speed.
him.
Yet all the evidence around the Guptas and others have been presented to them. There is not a word yet. Our director of public prosecutions, I don't know when last somebody has seen or heard from Sean Abrams.
He's got the nickname of Sean the Sheep.
No, but I think in seriousness, that's how the thing works. So because the law enforcement agencies would have been in the forefront of fighting corruption. So you weaken it deliberately, you make sure that the focus is elsewhere, and therefore you create the space for the kinds of corruption in all of the state-owned entities, big departments to happen, because you are sure then that there's very little that can begin to happen to deal with that problem until it's too late.
And South African society generally, I mean, we're not very vocal. We seem to be waiting for somebody else to do something about it. Do you think it's because people haven't yet grasped the fact that that's money being removed from bettering, a better life for all, rather than a few?
No, I think people have realized that there is a huge. I mean, for most people, corruption is either first or second to crime in terms of their list of concerns.
Yeah, no, we acknowledge it, but in terms
there's
of
a sense
yes,
of powerlessness
yes,
about what you can do as an individual. But there's also, for many, there would have been lingering hope that the ANC would be able to solve this problem as a matter of urgency. And that kind of hope is what would have sustained or would have kept many people from actually being more angry and demonstrating that anger that you would have seen in other parts of the world. But I think it's changing. One listens to all of the talk radio stuff, reading all of the papers, just listening to young people, I mean, people like in this conference and everywhere else. There is a growing sense of anger about the fact that this country is being stolen before our very eyes. And I think South Africans, even though they might not be into the streets on every day, what you saw in the last elections is really the way in which people feel is the most appropriate way to express their anger and dissatisfaction.
Yeah, they're speaking through the ballot box.
People will speak through the ballot box, and I think you will see that in 2019 if we don't have major changes by then.
Now, talking about the ANC correcting itself, we have a sterling woman rising up, Makosi Khoza, who at that conference actually spoke out and said that President Jacob Zuma must step down. And now the KwaZulu-Natal ANC Youth League is saying she should be put before a disciplinary committee. And I was talking to somebody last night and I was asking myself, why is she being put before discipline? But they said because she brings the organization into disrepute. But she spoke out against an individual, not the organization. And then we've got all these other ministers whose names are coming up in all these scandals, and they're not being called before a disciplinary committee for bringing in their case, because they're actually representatives of of that organization. As the AHMED KATHRADA Foundation and Save South Africa, are you going to rally behind her? Because I believe that she's also been getting death threats. Because people are asking, how do they give her support?
So I think the first thing we did was to ensure that she spoke at this conference. And that was one of the best ways to show the kind of solidarity and support in a public way. We didn't want people to only just phone and send her messages, but we needed to demonstrate support that she has, so that I think those who don't like what Makosi is saying need to understand that what she is saying has support amongst millions of other South Africans. So that was one of the concrete ways. In private, I think other people have been working with her and those around her, around security needs and so forth. But this is first and foremost a political issue. It's a political battle. And I think more and more people need to indicate their support for the kinds of views that she in fact expressed. I mean, I think it's an amazing thing that the call for discipline, as far as I understood it, is coming from the ANC KZN, not from the Youth League only. But there is an element of fear, because if other MPs become as bold as Makosi is, then come the vote of no confidence. They are not sure what will happen. So this is really an attempt to contain others, not only Makosi. It's an indirect message to everybody else who might be sharing the same sentiments as Makosi. She really is just being targeted because there is fear that others will go the same way. But the contradiction is that if she's bringing the organization into disrepute, the head of the organization, whom the Constitutional Court found to have been wanting in a huge way, surely they should have done the same things. Because had they done that, a person like Makosi would never have to do what she's doing at this point in time. So it's just a huge contradiction. It's just but because it suits their own particular interests to want to penalize her and as a way of shutting everybody else up, and not dealing with why she in fact has taken the positions that she has. I think they also don't realize that South Africans are watching all of this. They're listening to all of this. You know, for me, the disruption of the Kathrada Memorial Service in Durban,
it was the ANC Youth
in
League
full
there.
glare of live television coverage, said to me that people don't care about the views of those outside of their own ranks, because they think that electoral victory is certain for them.
Well, Frank Chikana gave a very interesting talk about the use of money in stealing the election. So maybe it's based on that they believe that we don't matter as voters.
Well, I think the local government elections showed that they are wrong. That people will no longer just vote on historical loyalties, but they will. South African voters are amongst the most sophisticated in the world. I've done the polling, I've done the research before, and they will look at, they will examine, I think, the party's performance, the individual performances, and ultimately will do what is in their best interests. And clearly, I think for many people, the current leadership and the current trajectory of the governing party is not in their best interest. And the last election showed that people will move towards other political formations. As uncomfortable as they might be, as difficult as it might be for many of them, but they will. Our politics is becoming contested now. There is nobody who has a right to rule or to govern. And political parties are going to have to fight to persuade voters that they are the ones who will be able to take this country forward. So those who think that voters are oblivious to what they are doing are either blind themselves or
they're drinking their own Kool-Aid.
Are just completely drunk with power, and it's not going to help them. Come 2019, it's not going to help.
I'm talking to Neeshan Bolton, the Executive Director of the AHMED KATHRADA Foundation. How many organizations, let's go back to the Conference for the Future of South Africa. I want to know how many organizations participated, but there's one thing in particular and that fascinated me, and it showed me the ability of the AHMED KATHRADA Foundation and Save South Africa to bring divergent parties together, where we had business South Africa telling us how they'd had fruitful engagements with the Communist Party and have actually come up with a joint strategy. And often we've always seen these as antagonistic forces.
There were about 130 organizations present there. The final figure, we're still getting that, because a number of people registered on the day. Organizations came on the day.
Oh, you mean 130 that you came
pre-registered?
Pre-registered, right?
I think that will increase. Covering all sectors of society. We had people from almost every part of the country in that conference as well. Today I got a call from the Teddy Bear Clinic.
Oh!
Saying they apologize for not having been there, but would certainly want to be part of this kind of work.
Oh.
And my sense is that as we move ahead, all kinds, because the Teddy Bear Clinic and others have a sense of the gravity of the problems of this country. They deal with the effects of it on a day-to-day basis. And therefore, I think many others would have liked to have been there and possibly will join us as we go along. So it's for me, it's no surprise that business, labor, the faith communities are finding commonality around the core issues that affect the country today.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hoping that they will also find that kind of commonality around the more deep structural problems of the country.
Mm-hmm.
But for now, we're happy that they are all focused on this issue. They're coming together. And in the next few days, we will be meeting with business and labor to talk about what needs to be done on August the 8th when the vote of no confidence takes
Yes, I
place.
want to come to that one because she's giving me the eye. And I was keeping that for last because for me, this is about the way forward now.
So in the way forward, there's a short-term program for this conference, all of the participants that took place there. One is to focus on August 8th and what we think should be done.
What's happening on August the 8th?
Well, preceding August 8th, the 5th and 6th, we really want a weekend of prayer and reflection on the state of democracy in our country. That weekend will probably also see us and many organizations doing mock ballots in different parts of the country as well. The 7th of August, we will probably see lunchtime demonstrations in different parts of the country.
Oh.
On the 8th itself, if business and labor agree, it will be a national day of action. There will probably be mass marches in different parts of the country, and specifically Cape Town, with a huge march onto Parliament itself. But the 2 weeks leading up to that, we really will be calling on all South Africans to engage their members of Parliament, particularly those from the governing party, and to put them onto public platforms to ask them where they stand and what it is that they're going to do to come the vote of no confidence. What we cannot accept is any parliamentarians from the governing party saying that they can't support the motion of no confidence because it comes from the opposition party. There's nothing that stopped them from having taken the initiative themselves.
Yes.
And it's really focusing on the issue rather than who initiated it. So we think that we should be able to galvanize all sectors of society who were present at the conference to commit to forms of action that culminates on the 8th. After the 8th is really about dealing with all the different tentacles of state capture, policy stuff, legal stuff, communications issues, and then engagements with Parliament itself on strengthening Parliament and its oversight role, and prosecutions where we think that is possible as well. So I think following from the 8th will be a multifaceted program tackling every aspect of state capture, but also a mass public awareness campaign. So that points you've been raising, what does this mean for me? What does it cost me? Why should I be concerned? Is really the basis of the kind of mass door-to-door campaign that we will be undertaking. And this leads us up to 2019. By 2019, what we really want is a set of civil society solutions to the country's problems that we would then be able to present to political parties as they prepare their party manifestos. And if those manifestos don't talk to these core issues of state capture, then obviously we lobby for those who come closest to the demands that I think civil society will be putting forward.
Okay. We've overrun our time and we still haven't captured. We haven't captured the things we need to capture. Neeshan Bolton, the Executive Director of the AHMED KATHRADA Foundation, you will keep us briefed about all these developments that will be basically happening in 2 weeks' time. And we want to thank you for that enlightening hour. And we hope to see your foundation here again pretty soon.
No, we will be, now that I know where you are.
And on that, we leave you to the news. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kofifi FM 96.